Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Brewer's Minute. So today we're going to try something different, and we are going to take a deep delve into one specific group of cards, and today that group of cards is going to be targeted discard. So the idea is we're going to talk everything you need to know about targeted discard, from what it is, to why it's good, to why it's bad, to what decks you should play it in or it gets played in, how you should play it in an actual game of Magic. Basically, from start to finish, everything you need to know about targeted discard. So along with letting me know what you think about this Brewer's Minute in specific, let me know what you think about this idea, because there's a lot of cool groups of cards out there, lots of potential here. So if you like this format, make sure to let me know, because we could do more of these in the future and talk about counter spells or burn spells or removal spells or planeswalkers or whatever, 2-drops. There's so many different possibilities, so let me know what you think of it. Anyway, a quick reminder before we jump into our deep delve on targeted discard. If you enjoy Brewer's Minute and the other series here on the channel, it would be amazing of you if you could take a quick second, click that subscribe button down in the corner of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So let's start with the basics. What is targeted discard? And by targeted discard, I'm referring to cards like Thoughtseize, cards like Inquisition of Kozilek, Duress, Doomfall, one mode is targeted discard. Basically, these are almost always black cards that force your opponent to not just discard a card at random or to discard a card of their choice, but to force your opponent to reveal their hand and let you pick what card they're discarding, either out of their entire hand or out of a relatively wide group of cards. So we're not talking Mind Rot here, or even Hymn to Turok here. We're talking about things that let you choose the card your opponent's discarding. So keep that in mind as we go through that. We're specifically talking about that type of targeted discard. So why do you play targeted discard? What is targeted discard good at? And there are a few different answers here. The most obvious answer for why targeted discard is good is because it answers card types that are hard to deal with, especially in its colors. Remember, we're talking primarily in black here. Black isn't especially good with dealing with spells on the stack. It's not especially good at dealing with artifacts and enchantments. Planeswalkers, it's improved at, but there's some really hard to deal with card types. A great example of this would be a deck like Blue-White Approach in Standard. Your opponent's looking to just counter your stuff, kill your stuff, eventually cast 2 Approach of the Second Sun to win the game. A mono-black deck is not going to have a real good way of interacting with that plan outside of their targeted discard. So it's really good at dealing with hard to deal with types, because a lot of targeted discard is pretty wide. It hits a wide swath of cards, all non-creature cards, all cards. So that's the number one reason why targeted discard is good, but there's some other reasons as well. It often lets you get rid of a really powerful card for just 1 mana. So you're using your 1 mana Duress to get rid of a 5 mana Planeswalker, a 7 mana Approach for the Second Sons. So it's important to point out here that this isn't the same as countering that spell or killing that spell, because your opponent's never spending their mana to actually cast it. So you're not getting the time walk tempo advantage that you would get with a 2 mana counter spell or a Doomblade or something, killing that permanent. But you still are using one really cheap card to deal with something that's much, much more powerful and much, much more threatening. In Modern in specific, another big benefit and reason to play targeted discard is it gives you something to do on turn 1. We've talked about this multiple times before. Modern is a fast format. If you're starting off your curve on 2, on 3, you're going to be behind everyone who's starting off on turn 1, suspending their Search from Tomorrows, playing their Goblin Guides, playing their discard. So by default, you play targeted discard in part because it allows you to spend your mana every turn to keep up with your opponent who's spending their mana every turn. So that's another really big benefit, especially in Modern, where most of the targeted discard that sees play is 1 mana. Another sneaky advantage of playing targeted discard is it gives you an information advantage. Like, you get to see your opponent's hand, and there's value to that. Knowing what your opponent's going to be doing over the next few turns, knowing what removal they have, what counter spells they have, what creatures they have. So even if you don't get to take something awesome with your targeted discard, just the fact that you get to see what your opponent's got going on adds some additional value. Finally, in Modern, as well as in Standard, but especially in Modern, targeted discard is kind of the force of will in the format. It's your way to protect yourself against unfair decks. This means if your opponent is going to try to storm off with Gifts Ungiven on turn 3, Thoughtseize is your way to protect yourself from that, just like a force of will would in Legacy, and it's kind of the same way to Standard. Like we were talking about the Approach of the Second Sun example, it allows your fair deck to not just die immediately to an unfair combo deck. So that's the final big advantage of playing targeted discard spells. On the other hand, targeted discard is not good at everything. There's a couple of really big drawbacks. Number one is targeted discard gets worse sometimes as the game goes along. For your opponent to have a card to discard, they gotta have a card in hand. So if your opponent plays all their stuff and on turn 5 or turn 10, you draw a Thoughtseize or a Duress, it's kind of a dead card. You just basically skipped your draw step because you have this Duress, your opponent doesn't have cards in hand, so it's actually worse than just drawing a land, like strictly worse than drawing a land in those scenarios. So while Thoughtseize is great on turn 1, Duress is great in the early game when your opponent has cards in hand, once everyone kind of plays out their hand and go into top deck mode, your top decks are worse than your opponent's top decks because every once in a while, you're going to draw this useless discard spell with no targets, while your opponent is probably drawing action. The second thing, and this is less of a concern, but it can be matchup dependent. In Standard, of course, where our discard is more limited, unlike Thoughtseize and Inquisition, which hit pretty much everything, Duress isn't good in every matchup. While it's awesome against control, if you knew you were going to play blue-white approach or control deck every round, you would main deck Duress no problem. On the other hand, if you run into Ramanamp Red, there's sometimes you're going to turn 1, cast a Duress, and your opponent's going to reveal a hand of lands and creatures, and you just basically got no value for your discard spell. So where do you play targeted discard? And this one kind of goes by format. In Modern, if you're playing black, you play Thoughtseize and Inquisition. It's basically that simple. You need a good reason to not start with about 6 copies of Thoughtseize and Inquisition combined as kind of the first card you put into your deck. You need a very compelling reason not to do it. Like you're playing Living End and you can't play it because you'd cascade into it and it'd ruin the plan of your deck. Otherwise, they're just ultra staples, most played cards in the format on the top 10 list, so just slot them in if you can cast it. In Standard, it's kind of the same. Most black decks are going to play Duress. However, the difference is the Duresses are more likely to be in the sideboard because of the problem we were just talking about, where Duress doesn't hit everything, so there's going to be matchups where you just whiff or you don't actually want access to it, but it's still powerful enough in the matchups where it's good when you're playing against the control decks, the approach decks, the spell-based combo decks, that pretty much every black deck is going to want it in their sideboards. Last but not least, we're going to move from the world of brewing to the world of gameplay. So how do you play targeted discard? And this one is actually kind of interesting. There's a few different ways. So most obviously, we're talking about the 1 mana benefit. You just cast it on turn 1. Uses your mana on turn 1. You pick whatever is the most powerful, the most disruptive, the best card in your opponent's hand. Get it out of their hand. That is a very common and very good way to play targeted discard. However, that's not the only good way to play targeted discard. So the second way to play targeted discard, which is worth thinking about, is to wait as long as possible. Let's say your opponent is playing a deck that combos off on turn 5. Let's say Through the Breach. Your opponent is playing a deck where they want to Through the Breach and Emrakul on turn 5. So you can fire off your Thoughtseize on turn 1, and that's fine. However, there might be value in waiting until turn 3, until turn 4, depending on what your hand and curve looks like, because that's actually giving your opponent more turns to draw into that key combo piece, increasing the odds that they actually have it in their hand to take it. So if you're looking to defend yourself against one specific thing, think about the turn that thing comes down. Approach of the Second Sun, 7 mana, Through the Breach, 5 mana, Escape Shift, and try to time your discard to go the turn or 2 before your opponent can play their game-winning combo piece. Finally, the third way to use your targeted discard is to use it to force through one of your important spells. This happens mostly against control decks, where your opponent probably has counter spells, and you're worried about your opponent countering something. So instead of just firing off your Duress in Standard against a control deck, maybe you hold on to it until you have something else that you want to play in that turn, a really powerful Planeswalker Planeswalker, let's say. So instead of just firing off your Duress and then the next turn, or the turn after trying to resolve your Planeswalker, wait until the turn that you want to cast your Planeswalker and have enough mana to Duress and cast your Planeswalker. And this allows you to make sure there's not a counter in your opponent's hand, or if your opponent does have counters, they have to spend their mana to counter your Duress, which taps them down and increases the chances that you get to resolve your powerful play. So turn one, great. Also waiting until the turn before your opponent can do their big play, very good. And holding onto your discard to force through your key play, also very good. So a bunch of different ways, a lot of flexibility when it comes to playing your targeted discard. So anyway, that is our deep delve into targeted discard. So what do you think? How else can you use targeted discard? Do you put targeted discard in your decks? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.